into the sub-assembly, mount the gasket, then install them together into rear bearing cover of main shaft. Screw them down. Check up to see if the rotation of passive gear of odometer is flexible. Install the cylinder assembly. First, put in a cylinder gasket. Then install the cylinder assembly from the top to the bottom. Insert the cylinder shaft into yoke hole. At the same time, mount 2 fine teeth bolts. Fix yoke and cylinder shaft. Get steel wire around to make it solid. And fix the cylinder and housing with 4 bolts. Mount the cover of countershaft of auxiliary case and gasket to proper places. Bolt hole is perforating. Use bronze gasket or nylon gasket to avoid leakage. Put in rear bearing cover gaskets of output shaft. Be careful with the contraposition, not to jam the oil tunnel. Mount rear bearing cover compounding onto main shaft. Be careful about the position of oil returning hole. Tighten rear cover and rear bearing cover with 6 bolts about 75 mm long, among which 1 bolt has a hole, another bolt with bronze gasket and nylon bush. It is used to prevent the perforation from leaking oil. These 2 bolts are installed at both sides of the odometer. Then screw down the 6 bolts. Mount dust-proof and active gear of odometer onto the flange. Install the flange and main shaft of auxiliary box to proper position. Screw down flange bolt with 609 to 677 Nm moment. Finish installation of auxiliary box assembly. Check up about teeth synchronizing. Install right reverse countershaft assembly. Baste lubricating grease on gasket to prevent it from dropping. Then insert it into reverse countershaft and screw the bolts down. Rotate the gear of countershaft manually. It should move smoothly. Install the short cylinder rolling bearing to proper position. The serial number if bearing is outward. Take left countershaft assembly. Install it into the left down part of housing of main case. Rotate the countershaft. Make sure that the marked teeth are towards the bearing hole of input shaft. Take input shaft assembly. Insert it through the input bearing hole. Use a cropper stick to knock the interface of the gear of input shaft. Make the stop groove of bearing outer ring protrude the front section of housing of main case. Take the bearing stop ring. Install it into 150212K. Stop groove of bearing. Knock the head of input shaft. Make the stop ring lean on the brim of the hatch. Timing left countershaft gear with input shaft gear. Load gear bearing of countershaft assembly and use a copper stick to knock it to right position. Show up the stop groove and mount the stop ring to right position with the plier. Check up timing of input shaft gear and countershaft drive gear. And insert the front end stop ring of countershaft to the groove in front of the countershaft. The hatch of the snap ring should be aiming at the long key of countershaft. Install the right countershaft assembly to the transmission housing and move it to the right side of the housing. Put the datum tooth of drive gear at the position of the datum tooth of the input shaft. Add lubricate grease in the main shaft guide sleeve. Move the right countershaft assembly forward and rightward until it touches the housing. Install the main shaft assembly into housing of main case. Firstly with the front end higher. Then move main shaft backward and downward. Later put the front end of main shaft into main shaft sleeve of the input shaft. Load drive gear assembly at the back of main shaft so as to guarantee location of main shaft assembly. First check up the timing of left countershaft assembly. Rotate the input shaft until the marked gear comes out. Time right countershaft with gears of input shaft. Then install bearing at the rear end of right countershaft and use a copper stick to knock it to right position, showing up the stop groove. Install stop ring to right position with the snap ring pliers. Install front end stop ring of countershaft into the groove in the front of the countershaft. Set the outer stop ring on the bearing. Knock the bearing with a copper stick to proper position. Set the front baffle and bolts of the countershaft assembly. The spring cylinder pin of baffle should be at a small hole on the front part of countershaft. Screw down the bolts. Use the same method to install front bearing of left countershaft and baffle to proper position. Check up the timing of countershaft again. Rotate the input shaft to see if it can rotate freely and if the timing has moved. Install the left reverse gear, countershaft with the convex in the front. Insert the reverse stop cone between the reverse countershaft and the cup-shaped washer. Then set them into the housing together with the gears. Knock the reverse countershaft slightly with a copper stick. Add washer and use self-locking nut to tighten it. Knock the bearing 42307E into the transmission housing with a copper stick, with the marked face outside. Dismantle the locating drive gear assembly. Move the reverse gear of main shaft to the back and let the two reverse counter gears mesh with each other. Insert 14750 stop ring to the groove on the reverse gear, main shaft. Install drive gear and inner spline of the drive gear meshes with outer spline of the main shaft. You can knock the driving gear. Set the stop ring of drive gear in the groove at rear end of the main shaft and use a screwdriver to prise the main shaft backwards. Pay attention to the main case operation. Set the 6-bolt on the locating plate of drive gear and screw it into the screw hole on the housing and sheave with the wire to prevent off. Rotate input shaft to see if it's flexible.